Monday edition of our Packers News training camp live chat. Alongside Tom Silverstein, I am Olivia Reiner. There were no fans at today's Packers practice. However, we were there. We were your eyes and ears, getting a glimpse at all of the Packers action. We'll hit you with the biggest storylines out of today's practice in just a moment. However, before we get into that, as always, you know the drill. You can be a part of our conversation. If you're over on Facebook or YouTube, leave us a comment down in the chat. I already see over there on YouTube, we've got a couple questions rolling in as we speak. We will get to some of your thoughts toward the end of our conversation today. Love was not in the air, nor was he on the practice field on Monday. Second-year quarterback suffered a shoulder injury to his throwing arm in the game on Saturday night against the Houston Texans. Head coach Matt LaFleur said Love is feeling much better. However, he was holding him out of practice today. We may not see Love in practice over the next couple days with the Jets in town. We will see. We're not sure yet. Head coach Matt LaFleur said there is a potential that Love would be available for Saturday's game against the Jets. How concerning is this potential missed time for Jordan Love?
I don't think it's a big deal. I think there's a pretty good chance that he could be ready by Wednesday. That's just my gut feeling. They seem to downplay it a little bit today. And, I saw him running around with the red jersey on, almost like he was ready to practice. And so he's got a full 24 hours, really 48 hours till he practices. And so I think there's really a chance that he'll go on Wednesday.
Love may have not been on the field today. However, there were plenty of interesting position battles that we got to witness as training camp continues on, especially along the offensive line. Offensive line coach Adam Stenavich said that the guard positions are very much still up for grabs. No one has really staked their claim over either position. We've seen players like John Runyon Jr., Ben Braden, Lucas Patrick, Royce Newman all get reps at guard on the offensive line. Who is most likely of that group to step up and claim the starting role?
That's anybody's guess. I mean, roll the dice on that one. Who's going to be the most consistent player throughout training camp? And right now, nobody's kind of stood out. Although, they plugged in rookie Royce Newman into the right guard spot today with the number ones. And that was a little bit of a surprise. So it kind of made me go back and look at the game. And I watched the last drive in particular, and he was really good. I mean, I thought he was really active. He was able to get out on linebackers. He did all his cutoff blocks. I think he's a new guy in that role. In that race. So who knows? But, there's a long way to go. And never rule out Lucas Patrick. He's a guy who just keeps coming back, keeps getting knocked down, and then he keeps coming back. We'll see how it goes. But, for right now, Royce Newman's in the number one spot.
The Packers offensive line, you mentioned that game, Tom, looked unimpressive against the Texans, especially when it came to run blocking. The Packers running backs, all four of them, combined for 19 carries for 53 yards. They simply weren't able to get anything going. Offensive line coach Adam Stenavich must have been tearing his non-existent hair out watching that game. They have to be able to clean some things up in practice this week. What can they do now to ensure that they don't repeat recent history against the Jets this upcoming weekend?
Well, maybe work on the run a little bit more. Maybe run some more plays. I think I don't know that they would admit it, but I think that they have tailored a lot of the first 3 weeks of training camp to Jordan Love to try to get him ready to play. And when they bring their starters back, they're going to be fine. What they're trying to do right now is just kind of establish a sort of a mentality, a running mentality that you kind of develop as camp goes on. You don't want to just have to go into your first game like, okay, now we got to turn it on. This needs to be a process. And what everybody forgets is that Matt LaFleur's offense was predicated with the run. And that's why they had such a good year offensively last year. I think they were 8th in rushing yards. So they got to make sure that when the season starts, they're ready to roll. And that's part of what was disappointing, I'm sure, for them in the first game.
Not only is there competition along the offensive line, there is plenty of competition in the cornerbacks room right now, all over the depth chart. If you look at the top, rookie cornerback Eric Stokes is trying to make a run for Kevin King in that starting role that King held last year. Stokes was given the primary reps with the ones alongside Jair Alexander in today's 2-minute drill. Then if you look a little bit more down the depth chart, you see players like Kabion Ento and Josh Jackson trying to make the 53. Ento made a pretty good case for himself with an interception against the Texans. Who is most likely to be a casualty when it comes time for the Packers to trim down to the initial 53?
Well, we got a little bit of ways to go on that before we can decide that. I think what is really up for grabs right now is the top 4 positions. So if you're a betting person, Jair Alexander and Kevin King are going to be the starting corners. I don't think there's any question about that. When Kevin King comes back, he'll be the starter. Chan Sullivan is probably going to be the slot guy. And then you start talking about the 4th, and that's probably Eric Stokes. And then we're talking about the 5th guy, and that's probably between Josh Jackson and Kabion Ento. Kadar Holman's there a little bit. Shamar Jean-Charles is someone they really like as a slot corner. I think a lot of it will come down to, of course, special teams, but probably Ento and Jackson are fighting for one spot, and maybe Holman and Jean-Charles for another. That's probably how it's going to go. But we know that Stokes will be there, and Sullivan and King and Jair Alexander. That's their top 4.
It may be too early to start talking about the initial 53. It is not too early, however, to start talking about the initial 85, I suppose we could call it. The Packers have to trim their roster down to 85 by 3 p.m. Central Time tomorrow, and they've already gotten a head start, releasing offensive lineman John Dietzen, the Wisconsin alum, and punter Ryan Winslow. Dietzen did not play against the Texans on Saturday. We did get to have a little bit of a taste of Winslow, and now he's gone. He got 3 punts in against the Texans, averaged 49 yards. To me, that's a big statement saying that, hey, we have some confidence, and by we, I mean the Packers. The Packers have some confidence in 4th-year punter J.K. Scott at the helm once again. Where do you see Scott going in his 4th year with the team?
Well, for one, so the impression is that Winslow was here for 3 weeks and then it was over. But he's been here all off season, and they've been competing through all the OTAs and everything like that. So they got a pretty good sense of both guys. And really, they need to make a couple of roster moves. And J.K. Scott's going to be their punter. I mean, there's no question about it. They're going to be patient. They're going to give him, it's been 2 years, and as Mo Drayton, the special teams coach, said, it's usually in the 3rd year that these specialists start to come around, and it takes a while. So, J.K. Scott is their guy, and barring something really disastrous happening during the season, you can expect him to be the punter.
One domino falls in these special teams specialists battles. There's still battles, quote unquote, at long snapper and at a kicker as well. So we'll get into some of the other questions that you all have right now in just a moment. So let's get over to Facebook and YouTube. We can start here with John. John got his question in right away when we started. If you had to grade Jordan Love's performance, what would it be? A C, a B minus? Love only got he completed 12 passes for 17 attempts, 122 passing yards. He only played the first half of the Texans game. It is hard to make a very sweeping statement about Jordan Love, his future potential, just off of that one half. However, all things considered, what did you think overall of his performance on Saturday night?
Well, I think I mentioned in the moment that it was probably a B minus. I really thought that he showed a lot of poise. I thought he didn't really panic. He was confident, running the offense. I think he's still trying to find his comfort within the pocket, being able to know when he can duck to the left or right or forward or all the things that Aaron Rodgers does so well within the pocket or just around the pocket, those are things that are going to be, he's going to continue to have to work on. But when, when he spotted a receiver and he threw it, he looked pretty good. I think each game he's got to be better. He's got to be more efficient. And I think the most important thing is he didn't turn the ball over. And that's going to be really key. He can't throw any really dumb interceptions. That's a big part of being a quarterback. So I'm waiting to see how his second game looks compared to his first. And to me, that'll be telling to some degree.
Thank you, John, for your question. Let's flip it over to Facebook now. Brian says, does the guard competition being wide open concern you? At this point, we are well past the first preseason game. We are well into training camp. And yet the Packers still haven't solidified their offensive line, namely at guard. How big of a concern should that be to Packers fans? The fact that no one has, and Stenavich said it himself, no one has stepped up and claimed those roles.
Well, it's a little bit concerning for the early part of the season. So there's a couple of factors going on. One of those is that Elton Jenkins is out playing left tackle now because David Bakhtiari isn't quite back yet from an ACL. And we don't know exactly when Bakhtiari will be back, but I would bet that it'd be sometime in the first month of the season maybe. So then Elton Jenkins will bump back to left guard. And, really they could end up moving Billy Turner to right guard, and then put Dennis Kelly in at right tackle, and boom, there you go. Your guard problem is solved. But they've got to prepare as though the two spots are open. And it would be concerning if they go in and they're not confident with either Ben Braden, Lucas Patrick, or John Runyon, and then they got a rookie at right guard. I think the one thing they got going for him is Lucas Patrick has played in the NFL, and he's got games and experience. And worst comes to worst, you plug him in there, and you're going to be okay. You may not be great, but this guy has played. So, it's concerning for the first couple weeks of the season, and then it could just be nothing. We may not even remember that there was a guard problem.
Thank you, Brian, for your question. Mike on Facebook wants to know, what does Green Bay do with the Devin Funchess quandary? Is he a numbers casualty, or can he provide depth as a slot receiver, number 4 wideout? Devin Funchess, after not playing football for 2 years, finally got his taste of the spotlight against the Texans. He played 34 snaps, had 6 receptions for 70 yards. We got to see a ton of him, and I'm sure the Packers coaching staff, they were curious to see what he would look like under the lights after not playing for so long. What role can he potentially play in this Packers offense if he makes the 53?
Well, he's an experienced receiver. He's a guy who is big and long, and he can be a factor if he's the guy who signed with the Colts 3 years ago, 2 years ago, whatever it was. At that time, he was a pretty decent receiver. I think it all comes down to how quickly does he shake the rust off? Did this game just shake it off? And then next is he's got to do something with the ball. We see that he can kind of get open in the flats and, but down the field, can he make a catch and then run with it? And that's pretty much what's going to depend on whether he's on the team. I think what he does with the ball in his hands is the most important thing.
Thank you, Mike, for your question. Going back to our conversation on the offensive line and flipping it over to YouTube, Flo wants to know, when will David Bakhtiari be ready, like week 3, 4, or potentially later? Bakhtiari is still working his way back from an ACL injury. Part of the reason why the Packers are in this quandary with their offensive line and the guards is because they've had to do some shuffling with Bakhtiari out. And right now, this is where they are. So are the Packers currently expecting Bakhtiari to be healthy?
I don't know. None of us really know that, but the 10 month um, anniversary of the surgery is kind of a day to look at. Typically, they Packers have sort of worked that way. They want you to be 10 weeks healed from the surgery, or I'm sorry, 10 months, and that would be basically October 1st for Bakhtiari, who I think had the surgery in early January. And so, yeah, that would be my guess. Maybe game 5. Maybe he's a little bit ahead of it and they can get him in for game 4. But I think it's somewhere around there, right around October, that he comes back. That's my guess. I'm not a doctor. You know, I watch him rehab. He looks great. But it's really all about the ligament being healed and the flexibility and strength he has in his leg.
We're glad you're not a doctor, Tom, because
Mhm.
otherwise you wouldn't get to join us on these live streams and we wouldn't get to hear all of your knowledge. So just throwing that out there. Thank you, Flo, for your question. Let's go over to Linda on Facebook. Linda wants to know who has surprised you both good and bad in training camp. Listen, we've got a lot of players to evaluate, 88 currently on the roster. Who has stuck out to you for the right reasons and maybe the not so right reasons over the last several weeks?
Well, uh, it's kind of it's been kind of a crapshoot. One guy who I really liked early on was receiver Juwan Winfrey. I thought that guy was really quick and could add something to their team, but then he got a shoulder injury. He's been out for about a week, and he once you're out that long, it's pretty hard to make it up. So that was a guy I kind of liked. My new guy that I kind of like is defensive lineman Jack Heflin, who I think is a try hard guy, massive body. They seem to be interested or seem to be giving him a chance to get reps and to maybe make the 53. I think that's a guy to kind of keep an eye on. I would say that from a disappointment standpoint, I haven't seen a ton out of Randall Cobb. There's been some stuff that he's been good at. Amari Rogers too, I thought was going to be a real boom type of a player, and he kind of did start out really well, and now he's kind of just tailed off. So I want to see whether he can kind of pick it up. And right now, he's kind of on my, arrow pointing downward. He was upward before, but now he's got to kind of pick it up a little bit.
We've got a couple more weeks to make some judgments, so we'll continue to have these conversations as the weeks continue. Thank you, Linda, for your question. Let's go to Helmut von Packerbacker, very fun name, over on Facebook. Inside linebacker play looked fast and active in the game's first half. Do you expect that to continue in this week's practices with the Jets? There seemed to be a viable tandem going there. So the Packers, right now, the top 2 inside linebackers appear to be Chris Barnes and Devondre Campbell, who the Packers signed recently. Barnes, an undrafted free agent. The Packers have struggled to find a real solid duo at inside linebacker. What do they have in Barnes and Campbell?
Well, I think what they have is sort of the best of 2 different skills. So they have a guy in Chris Barnes who can move laterally, who can shoot gaps, who can play the run pretty well. And then they got a guy in Devondre Campbell who can drop into coverage, who can run with tight ends, basically a pass coverage guy. And together they get a little bit of both out of that. But I think this is a substitution game, and we will see all kinds of combinations. Sometimes Adrian Amos will come in and play next to Chris Barnes, and they'll go with 3 safeties. Sometimes it might just be Campbell if they're playing more zone and they want their middle linebacker to be able to drop, maybe even on third downs. It could be Campbell. If it's a running team, then they might go with Burks and and Barnes. Burks had a pretty nice game, and they might find some packages for him to go in. But middle linebacker is not a huge position in Joe Barry's system. It's there are going to be a lot of instances where they actually use an extra defensive lineman, where they want to play the run with 5 guys up front and then maybe just one linebacker. So it's kind of a position that will really be dictated by who the Packers are playing. And we'll see how those combination goes. But Chris Barnes, to me, is kind of the guy in the middle right now. He's not going to be unseated.
Thank you, Helmut von Packerbacker, for your question. Let's go to Brad on Facebook. Brad wants to know, why hasn't Josh Jackson developed like he was expected to coming out of Iowa? Jackson, a second-round pick back in 2018. He's entering his 4th year in the league with the Packers, and yet we're talking about him as if he may not make the roster. Right now, he's in a battle even to make the 53, and it seems like today, he's slipped behind Kabion Ento, who was the first sub after the top 4, so to speak, came off the field at some point during 11-on-11s. Ento was the 5th on the field, Jackson the 6th on the field with the 1s. Where is Josh Jackson right now in his battle to make the 53, and why hasn't he lived up to his second-round status?
Well, he's not in a great place. He had a pretty poor game against Houston, and all camp long, he had been pretty solid. They had been giving him every opportunity to be the number 3 corner, outside corner, and he'd been doing pretty well. And then he gets in a game and he lost his confidence. And this has been the case to me all through his career about his speed. And so he starts giving up too much cushion because he's worried about getting beat deep. And then teams just start throwing underneath. And he can't recover in time to do that. At some point, he's got to get up there and challenge wide receivers. And, part of his problem is because he doesn't trust his speed, he uses his hands and he grabs too much and gets penalties. So this is a key moment for him. I would say, his job is on the line in the next, I would say, week, 2 weeks.
A big couple of weeks then for Josh Jackson. Thank you, Brad, for your question. Finally, a friend of the show, Aaron Nagler, wants to know, my only question is, did they play It Takes Two at practice, and did Spoon bust a move? Any dancing? I didn't see any dancing from you on the sideline, Tom, but maybe while my back was turned, were you dancing today?
No raw bass today. If they had played a little raw bass, I usually go over to the side and kind of just get into my little groove. But unfortunately, Nagler saw that one time and now lets everybody know about it. But yeah, there was no raw bass today. It was kind of disappointing. I'm sure we'll get some of that during the Jets, though.
Do they take requests? Will they play more of Tom's choice in music? I guess we'll never know.
Yeah, I'm a man of the 80s,
I don't know if we're going to be hearing too much 80s at practice going forward, but hey, you never know. We don't know who watches these live streams. I want to see more dancing Tom on the sideline. And I'm sure a lot of people would too.
Yeah, I'm sure they would. Yeah.
That is going to do it for us today, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We will be back on Wednesday to continue to have these discussions and to take your questions. So if we did not get to you today, do not worry. Just come back Wednesday and we will chat with you again. For Tom, I am Olivia. We will see you next time.